All right, let me start the webinar here. Okay. All right, welcome everybody. This is Nick Klosky, and I am one of the co-founders of Honeypoint 3D. So I welcome you to the January 2017 monthly 3D printing and 3D design webinar. Super happy to have everybody on the webinar today, and for the people who watch this during replay on our YouTube channel. So this week, I'd like to say Jiminy Crickets. We have a lot of user-supplied questions that I am very anxious and eager to share with everybody. Just as a very, very quick thing, let me kind of open up my own company's webpage here. Actually, I need to do it like this. Let me screen share here so everybody can see it. Like this. There we go. So Honeypoint 3D helps create 3D models, whether that is through 3D services like using our engineers to do 3D modeling or scanning or 3D printing, or on this side, on the left-hand side, learning with online education. And that is part of what we're doing today, is the online education part. So that is kind of what Honeypoint 3D does. Let me go back here and bring myself up here. And I'm one of the co-founders of that. We started in 2015, actually 2013, I'm sorry, with a retail store, but we quickly evolved out of that to do kind of a business-to-business service and business-to-consumer with the education. So we have online training classes, 3D services, all sorts of things. So I have a lot of questions from people who have submitted their things to me, so I'm going to go over those today. But if any of the people that are on the webcast also have any questions, please let me know. Type in the little box there and ask me questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. Let me also share the screen here. Actually, click on that. So we're also authors of Getting Started with 3D Printing, which is the #1 bestseller in 3D graphic design on Amazon. So this book is doing actually very, very well. And if you want to learn about 3D printing or 3D design, I would suggest that you go over to Amazon, or Barnes & Noble also has it, and get this book. It's only, $14 or $10 on Kindle, and we think that it's a very good deal. It's been getting very good reviews, 15 5-star reviews. So I'm one of the authors, and Lisa is the other author. Let me go back here. And we had a great time writing it and a great time giving out that information. So let us know if we can help you with any of your 3D printing needs. So without any further ado, let me get to the numerous questions that people asked. And the first one is from, let me look at my list here, Jane. So Jane asked a pretty simple question about how to get something ready for 3D printing if it's just what's called a non-manifold model. So let me switch over to Meshmixer and give a good example of that. Let me go like that and bring up, here we go, Meshmixer. And I'm sorry for the people that are watching this on replay. You can't, I don't think, see the my cursor, although I can, I don't know if I can change that on the fly. Oh, I guess I can. There we go. Okay, so this is a 3D model that was actually just on Thingiverse, I believe, downloaded for CNC. So it would come in here, it would be cut, because you can see the bottom is this kind of striped color. Kind of weird to see it like that. But the stripe color just means that this is an infinitely thin object. This would never 3D print because it only has one outside face, and when you print something, you need to have all outside faces. So the question is how to extrude this for 3D printing. And actually, the question is not that hard to answer. So Jane, I'm going to press C right here to center in. I'm going to zoom right over to the edge. I'm going to click on select. I have a kind of a big selection, so I'm going to press left bracket to make this very, very small. I make it very small like this. And then I'm going to double click right on this border right here. After a second, you see that the border is selected. I'm going to press O to optimize the selection, because sometimes the selection isn't the best. And you see that there's a selection all the way around the outside. So here's actually kind of an awesome little trick. And let me show the grid here, just to kind of give you some sense of where this is. So the edge is selected. I'm going to hit T for transform. What that normally does is it transforms the entire object, but if there's a selection, then it's only going to transform that selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring just the selected edge down until it is kind of past where the plane is, or essentially where the bottom of this is, and then click accept. So after a second, and you can see this is kind of a big model. This is 2.1 million triangles. So now we have kind of an edge on the bottom, and it's very simple. You go to Edit to Plane Cut. You could also just double click on this border and click Fill. That would work. But sometimes when you do this transform, the edges aren't exactly perfect. So the plane cut, once it comes up here, will go and bisect this box. And again, this is 2.5 million triangles, so it takes a little while. So I'm going to move this down a little bit. And again, there may be faster tools like Remake or even Fusion that might do this a little bit faster, or I could have reduced this, but you kind of get the idea. Once this updates here, I'm going to click accept, and it's going to create a box down on the bottom because this edge was a contiguous edge, and it will create a bottom once it's kind of done processing. Again, this is 2.5 million triangles, so it has to do a lot of computations, and Meshmixer is, there we go, I just click accept. Meshmixer is indeed a fast program for some things, but for some things it's kind of slow. So as you see, when I brought the plane cut down, and it was a kind of a valid result, it created a solid block on the bottom, and then here we go. So now this is a solid block. I didn't have to do any sort of weird extrusion of the part in the middle or anything. I just selected the edges and brought that down. And now that is completely 3D printable. Maybe a couple little weird things on the edge right there, but that's just part of bringing it down. But that's kind of a very simple thing. Let me go back here. There we go. So hopefully, Jane, that was a very simple thing for you. Your question was very similar to that, about how to bring just kind of a plane and not have to extrude the whole thing, because sometimes you can get kind of weird extrusions in different ways if you try to extrude or offset everything. You don't need to for something like that. You just take the outside and then you extrude it down. So hopefully, let me cross this one off. Hopefully that was good. Okay, so we had another question. This one is from Andrew about how to do, how to kind of help with models that have reversed normals. So this is models, actually let me just go back into Meshmixer and I can start talking about that. So let me import a different one, replace this with this one. Okay, so this is a model, once it comes up here, that I downloaded off of Thingiverse. Let me get rid of the grid here. That is very typical, right? So you think it looks great, you could 3D print this maybe, but then when you start looking around, you see some things popping off. So let me center here and look here, and we say that this has been modeled in a traditional kind of 3D modeling program that doesn't care at all about 3D printing. So these right here are flipped normals. You can see that, actually these aren't even flipped, these are the inside and outside kind of coming into each other. They're kind of, because this is such a thin part of the kind of boot right there. But you also see this pop over in some other places. So right here on the arm, you can see some issues right there. And then I think, if I looked before, there were some issues, you can see like behind the helmet, like right there. We can also force some flipped normals. If I just kind of select an area, and go like that and go to edit to flip normals. right? You can kind of see it like that. But a lot of times they're not as apparent as like this big swath here, is that they might be a couple little flip normals or some weirdness underneath there. So Meshmixer actually has a couple of ways of doing this. One way that I do if I'm working with a model that I don't know is to go and do Make Solid. So go to Edit to Make Solid. And I'll just go kind of even blocky, something like that. Just something that's very, very quick. Actually, sometimes blocky isn't quick. Actually, blocky doesn't good, but just sometimes fast might be good. And see if your model like freaks out in any way. So, you know, this part of the model is fine in the center, but when you get to those boot things, let's look down here, those really didn't turn out well. Meshmixer is pretty intelligent, so it flipped the normals where I selected it, but you also see that maybe the back of the head didn't really turn out as well either. So a lot of times this Make Solid can give you a good kind of diagnostic information. You don't have to click accept, you just kind of see a preview of what it does. So one really good way is obviously switch this to accurate. So if we update with accurate right now, we get a little bit more, right? But it's not accurate at all, so we're going to turn up the accuracy and density a little bit. So it meshes it, makes it a little bit more complex this time, checks, yeah, and that sometimes happens. I actually don't, it doesn't happen too often for me, but Meshmixer sometimes isn't the most robust program in the world. It does sometimes do it. Let me bring this guy back in. I did this whole thing earlier and it didn't crash on me, but let's try it again. So we go to Edit to Make Solid, and we're going to go to Accurate with a higher density and Update. We'll let this mesh up a little bit. Oh, and it did it again. Actually, I don't know why it's doing this. I was able to do it before. So this actually gives a good troubleshooting thing. Let me try one more time before I go to a different kind of process to do this. So whenever actually this happens, I would want to go to Analysis to Inspector to see if there's any issues. No issues right there. So Inspector doesn't find any. So let's go to Make Solid. So let me kind of jump ahead to how I would solve this. So I'm going to switch this to Accurate and send the accuracy up. But here's a couple things. So minimum thickness right here on the left is set to 0, which means it's perfectly okay to end up with things that don't exist, holes, right? So we want to change the minimum thickness. If I was going to be 3D printing this, for example, you know, I'd want the minimum thickness to maybe be a couple of layers, so maybe, you know, 0.4 millimeter. And I could even offset it a little. Offset will reduce the quality, but it sometimes also fixes things. So I'm going to change the minimum thickness to 0.43, you know, around that. And I'm going to click Update, and I don't know, maybe Meshmixer will crash this time, or maybe not. But the minimum thickness, and sometimes, yeah, it crashed this time. I actually don't know why it did that. Let me try one more time. And if this doesn't work, then I'll give up. But essentially, I've given you the, let me try a different one. I've given you the kind of tips and tricks that I use for this is certainly using the Make Solid with that minimum offset of 0. And yeah, let me try this one more time. Make Solid, Accurate. So minimum thickness, you know, a couple layers that I would print on a 3D printer. I can even do a tiny bit of offset as well. I mean, this is 0.07 millimeters, so very, very little. Let's see if Meshmixer crashes this time. I was able to do this whole thing this morning, but for some reason, it's not very happy right now, so we'll see. There we go, actually. Maybe he was just setting the offset distance a little bit. So you see the offset distance, if we go down here, it starts to get a bit more of the flaps of these boots. So that's certainly good. If we turn up the minimum thickness to maybe, you know, 1 millimeter, maybe I'm pushing my luck here, but we'll see. And it'll mesh it. Looks like it is working. Looks like a little bit better. So you can kind of play around with a little bit more offsets, but remember offset will change your model very, very slightly, just by like 1/10 of a millimeter. Sometimes you might or might not care about that. But there we go. You know, offset distance of about 0.16 gets really good features inside of the boots right there. And remember, this is non-destructive. You still have your old one down here. Yep, and it's we're not looking at it. And so there are maybe some still little floaty things around, so you can go in with analysis to inspector and just repair all, and it'll delete all of those. And that is a little bit better. Now all of the flipped normals are fixed, and this is eminently 3D printable. So hopefully that helps answer a question that you had, Andrew. Essentially, make solid with that minimum thickness and maybe a slight offset will will make things printable. Your question also was, sometimes will a model go into your slicer and be fixed magically? The answer is maybe. All slicers will try to fix models a little bit, but I really don't want to test that out on a model, because sometimes the slicer will have, I don't know if I have any good 3D models around here. Well, I could try something like this. This is something actually printed for my grip out of a flexible material, which is kind of cool. So sometimes a model like this will be totally fine, and then there's like 2 or 3 layers inside of here that your slicer just freaks out about, but your model looks okay. But when it gets to those layers, it just absolutely skips them. So really, it's good to make sure that your models are healthy before you put them into slicer, and don't believe what the slicer does. It should be your last resort thing that maybe you just kind of forgot to repair a model and maybe your slicer catches it. Better to have a good model going in. Okay, so hopefully that helps answer that question. And I wonder, oh, you guys already did the polls. Yeah, I haven't really used the polls all that much, so it's kind of awesome. So people are using 3D technologies for both personal and business use, so that's awesome. Half and half for solid or intermediate and advanced, and mesh modeling beginner and intermediate, so that's really cool. Okay, good. So hopefully, Andrew, that answered your questions on that. Okay, Cynthia. So Cynthia, let me bring up a picture right here and share my screen again. Bring this over. So Cynthia was creating, let me kind of resize this a little bit. There we go. So Cynthia was creating models that have a little dowel in them, and then it looks like some sort of like pipe cleaners or things put in. So her question was how to create that in Meshmixer. Well, let me kind of put this over for a reference right here and go back. The answer, Cynthia, is that I would not create these inside of Meshmixer. So this is a more mechanical shape, and while you can create mechanical shapes in Meshmixer, you're very right. While you start like cutting holes into other things and all of that, it gets to be a little bit harder to do. So let me show you how I would do this. Let me share my screen again and bring up Fusion. So this is Fusion 360. So if you're creating a mechanical shape, this is the way to do it. And it's actually would be very easy to create what you have right here. So I'm going to kind of bring back a reference that you can see. This is what we'll be creating. Take this away. So really, the way that you would do this in Fusion is very easy. You would say create a cylinder. I'm just going to select this bottom plane here. And I don't know how big. I'm going to say, probably, 6 millimeters. Zoom in a little bit. 6 millimeters, like that, and press enter. Then it asks me how high I want it. So let's just say, 30 millimeters. I'm not sure. There we go. And if I want to change this, I can just double click down here. And I don't know, let's make this maybe 60 millimeters, a little bit taller. So you said that this is also something that you're using for resin printing, and you want a drainage hole in the bottom. So what we can do is go to Modify to Shell right here. And we click on the bottom face, which is the, when you click on something, that's what gets taken away. So I'm going to click on that, and it asks what thickness I want. I'll just say something like 1 millimeter. So what that does, it's now created a 1 millimeter tube all the way down in there. So now you, if I bring this over here, you want to create dowels or you know, these little pipe cleaners at different angles coming out of this tube. I can see these like little black marks here where they would come out. So that's actually super easy. So what we can do is we say construct up here. So this is creating a construction plane. And we want to say axis through cylinder, cone, or torus. So we can click on, I just clicked on that, and it made an axis right through the center of the object. And now I'm going to do construct, and you see this construct here, so it's axis 1. I'm going to go back up to construct and say plane at angle. So I can click on this axis that I just created, and I'm creating an angle right here. So that's at 0 degrees. Awesome. Let me do it again. I'm going to go construct and say plane at angle, click on this, and instead of 0 degrees, let's say 45 degrees. I'm just going to do 2 right now. So I've created one right here and one right here. So now I'm going to go to sketch and say create sketch up here, this little down arrow. And ask me where I want to create it. I will just click on one of these construction planes like this. And now I'm looking right at my cylinder. And I'm just going to do a little sketch. I'm going to do a circle, a little center diameter circle right on here. It kind of automatically clicks to this axis line. And I'm going to bring it up to maybe be a 3 millimeter circle. And press enter. And stop sketch. So now I have a 3 millimeter circle that's directly on the inside of that cylinder. And here's kind of a little bit of a tricky part. You hold your mouse down and then let go. And then you can go down and select everything under your mouse. So I don't need the sketch, don't need the face, don't need that face, don't need that plane. There we go, the profile. So I'm going to click on that, and the profile is selected. And then with my mouse over it, I'm going to right click and say extrude. And I can extrude it either side, either forward or back. I'm just going to take it back, and it extrudes until it hits another object, and then it turns into a cutting tool like that. And I click OK. And now we have a hole that is cut through based on that plane. So the plane disappeared because it thinks that I don't need it anymore, but I can always click on this plane again to get the plane back. So that's great. And I can just do the same thing, right? So I can go and say sketch, create sketch on this plane now. Now I'm facing this plane. Sketch, circle, center diameter circle. Kind of come down from here. Another 3, like that. And you don't have to just do one circle. So I can go to sketch, circle, center diameter circle, kind of hover my mouse over this and then come down and then do another 3 right here and click stop sketch. So now I have those two. I'll hold my mouse down, select the profile, and extrude that out. Boop, like that. And see my sketch kind of disappeared. I can go back into the sketch here and make it turn on again, because sometimes it turns off those sketches. Hold down my mouse, select profile, right click extrude, and then I'm going to extrude maybe this way. And we have holes at all different angles. And so it's kind of cool, because if I go in and say out here that these planes I created at 0 degrees, I'm double clicking on these planes at the bottom. 45, I can say, actually, I want this at 67 degrees. I say OK, and then all of my holes update to be 67 degrees. So that's very, very powerful with this, that you can set these to be whatever you want. And that's how you would get those holes, and it's all hollow. If I do a section analysis here, let me just turn on the origin. I can kind of show you. There we go. So I kind of cut away half of this, and I'm doing a section analysis. You can see that all of the holes are there. They're all cutting through. So click like that. Okay, hopefully, Cynthia, that helped you understand how you might use Meshmixer to do, how you would use Fusion to do that, whereas Meshmixer might be a little bit hard, but in Fusion, it's faster to do it, and it makes it a lot more easily updated as you go on, because you just change, where those planes are and all of that. Okay, so Juliana asked a question. Can I talk about how I would match the settings inside of Make Solid to match up with the printer? Yeah, certainly. Let me go back here. This model was giving us a little bit of an issue, so let me just bring in our good old bunny here. Yeah, so to match up with the printer, that's a really, really good idea, right? So you have, let me go to accurate here. So you have the density, right? So this is the cell size. So if you're trying to, if you can kind of see, you might be able to see it on the replay or not, but the cell size is 0.4 millimeters. So that is the individual size that it uses to find features. If this is turned up, more, you get more features for the accuracy. Otherwise, if you turn it way down, your ability to resolve individual features goes away. Let me go here. So when you're tuning for a 3D printer, you may not want to do it inside of Make Solid. Minimum thickness, that's very good, right? So if your printer can't print 0.1 layers and you're going for 0.2 layers, it really makes sense to kind of set this at 0.2 for sure. But one better way to do it is when you select and go to edit to remesh, when you are remeshing. What you can do is say target edge length right here. And so you remesh to and target edge length of 1 millimeter. So this would be matched with the XY resolution of your printer. So I'm not talking about necessarily layer height. I'm talking about the detail inside of one layer in the XY. So kind of like looking down on this. So if you have a resolution that is, maybe a 0.2 resolution for edge length, you would set that there and then remesh to that edge length. Now, even for this bunny, setting the edge length to 0.2 can be kind of time consuming. But if you're trying to work with a model that already has a lot of detail, if you set your edge length to anything that is more than this, then you'll potentially be losing out on resolution later on. So that's one kind of trick when you're doing edge length. The Make Solid is really, you shouldn't need to use that. Actually, while this is running in the background, let me come back here. Make Solid isn't something you should always use. It's something that's really good for testing to see if there's any egregious errors in your mesh. And only when you think that there might be an issue. It's not something you should always use because it does change your model. For complex models, it can take a long time to run Make Solid, so that's another thing. Let me give you actually a pro tip that I wanted to bring up with this that actually Andrew and Juliana and all of you might be able to use. I was given a really complex model that was about 400 megabytes. It was actually of I think part of an oil rig. It was created by a 3D modeler and just errors everywhere. Meshmixer took about 30 minutes to run a Make Solid, and then it was just nothing. It was garbage. I couldn't use it. The really weird thing is the one program that I was able to use that was able to fix that. NetFab Professional was not able to fix it. Meshmixer, no. Blender, no. I mean, everything I did, and I'm almost willing to give a prize if anybody could guess this. But let me show you the tool that actually was able to fix this really, really bad model, and you'll almost never guess it. It's Photoshop from Adobe. I will let you pick your jaws up off of the floor now. Photoshop can actually open 3D models, STL files. When this is that kind of big guy that I was playing with in Meshmixer, and while I may not use Photoshop for all things, what Photoshop did for this model was absolutely amazing. It was able to repair a model that every other piece of software was not. And someone gave me this tip, and I was just absolutely shocked by it. So it's not, yeah, as you can see, it's not the fastest thing in the world to, or maybe Meshmixer is taking up some memory in the background. You see, it's not the fastest thing to open STLs, but I was able to actually really, really repair models with Photoshop. So this is Photoshop Creative Cloud. It's the latest one out from Adobe. You actually, have to pay monthly for this. It's not something that you can, download or buy individually. Let me resize this here. But, it is a full kind of 3D thing. I would never have thought of that. And the way that I fixed it was really, you just go up here to 3D and say 3D print. You can do some settings for printers and things like that. You just say 3D print, and then you just say, print to an STL file. And it actually magically fixed this horribly complex model. So, I'll just kind of let this do its thing in the background here while I come back to you all. So if any of you happen to have Photoshop, just give it a try. And that's, Creative Cloud. It's not kind of the older versions. Who knows? It might actually work. Again, it worked for me for a model that allowed me to send that model out for printing that no other piece of software did. So kind of cool. Okay, so Cynthia, I got to you. Oh my gosh, so we have a couple really interesting things from Sarah. So her initial question was how to, and let me bring these pictures up. Oh, there we go. Get rid of Photoshop here. Not save. Okay, let me bring this up here like this. All right, so Sarah had a really awesome question. So these are pictures of a heart taken with an echocardiography machine. So this is not a CT scan. This is just essentially like an ultrasound for the heart. So very low resolution, and you start to see, different shapes. I have no ideas if the X's or O's are bad or not. But this is part of the heart, and I guess I would assume that that's doing good things and not. But I'm just kind of cycling through all of these images. And how you would create a 3D model of that in Meshmixer to use to create a 3D model of the heart, essentially. So these are all slices, essentially. So it's very similar. Let me actually bring this up. There we go. Let me zoom in a little bit. So this is, you can kind of see this fake little EKG wand, slicing one part of the heart and then moving into another part of the heart, and then another and another and another, right? So these are volumetric slices. So her question was, just because I like to talk right here, her question was, how do you create a 3D model based out of those? And so I figured it out. So I think this is a pretty good workflow, and it's not using Meshmixer, it's using Fusion. So let me go in and answer your first question, Sarah, on this. Let me go back here and go back into Fusion. So I will get rid of that, get rid of that. Okay, so I'm gonna go in and in Fusion, this is just the default space right here. I'm gonna say insert an attached canvas. So under insert, there's a little arrow, attach canvas. Ask me where I want to insert. I'll just put this in the bottom right here. So this bottom plane like that. Select image. So I will go and I'll just say mock echo 1. So that'll come in, it'll come in kind of super small and all of that, but we'll fix that. So I'm going to set the opacity to maybe 50% and display through. Those that's what I do for all of these, 50% and display through. And I'm going to say, okay. So that brings in one picture. And what's the order? So I'll do this again. So what I'll do is I'll say construct an offset plane. So construct offset plane. Sometimes you can't click, you just need to click here on origin to see the origin. So now I'm going to click on this bottom, and it asks where I want to do the offset plane. So I don't know, Sarah, where how deep these slices go, but let's say they're 5 millimeters, right? 5 millimeter pictures of the heart. So I'm going to create this at 5 millimeters up. So now you see I have another plane right here, this guy, that's 5 millimeters above this one. And I'm going to do the same thing. Insert, attach canvas on this new face right here. Select image number 2. And it's already remembered 52% and display through. So I'm going to say OK. And so this one's smaller. We're going to fix that. I'm going to do this one more time. Move this another 5 millimeters up. Insert canvas. Click on the new one. Select image, and then 3. So now these are not the right size. You see they're all different sizes. I'll open up. We have canvases here and our 2 planes right here. So I'm going to turn off the little light bulbs on these. So I'm going to right click on this Mach Echo 1 and say calibrate. So that I'm going to rotate around. I'm going to maybe just very vaguely assume that I'm going to click on maybe this line and say that that's 5 millimeters. No idea if it is, but now that is kind of true to life, assuming that those hash marks were 5 millimeters. I'm going to turn off the light bulb for this, turn on the light bulb for this. Super, super small. Going to zoom in, do the same thing. Right click, calibrate, and zoom in more. From here to here, and I'm just going to type in 5. Boop. And now that got big. And then the last thing, turn that one off, turn that one on, do the same thing again, zoom in, right click on this, say calibrate, and say from this hash to this hash is 5 millimeters. So now if we turn on all of our planes, zoom in a little bit, we have 3 images stacked on top of each other, and they're all aligned because I didn't move them or anything, but now they are properly sized. You can see that they're pretty much the same. One of these might be a little bit different size, but that's kind of okay. Great. So the second thing is I'm going to turn off these 2. I'm just going to work on this bottom one for right now. I'm going to say sketch, create sketch, and I'm going to create it right on this bottom plane right here, which is where this canvas is attached. And then you just care about this X, right? That's what you told me in your email. So I'm going to say sketch a spline down here. And I'm just going to do a spline around this. I can zoom in a little bit more and say, you know, this is generally the shape. And then I get all these control handles. I'm going to hit escape to exit out of the spline tool. And then I have these control handles. I can change these. I can change the tangency of all of these with these little handles, you know, make them different size and shapes. But I'm going to say that's generally what I want for that one and say stop sketch. Great. Now I'm going to turn off this canvas, turn on this one. And the sketches, I can even turn off the previous sketch too. So now I'm going to say sketch, create sketch. I'm going to create it on this plane. You can kind of see right here, or I can even select the plane, which is plane 1. All right, I'm going to do the same thing. Go down to sketch, to spline. Now it's bigger. Kind of there. I can kind of see a shadow of it there. Oops, that was wrong. And then end it like that. Stop sketch. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the third one. Turn off that previous sketch. And let me do the same thing, create sketch on plane 2 right here. That's great. And sketch spline. And I know that, I could be doing actually a double right here, right? Because there's an inside and an outside. I could create two of these splines if I wanted to, but I'm just trying to do this fast. And I click Stop Sketch. So now I'm going to turn off all of my canvases and turn on all of my sketch profiles. And now it's just very easy. I would say create a loft, and I'm going to loft from here to here to here, like that. And I've created some sort of shape. If I use that for all 10 of these slices, I would have 10 of these going up. Now, if I wanted to, now I can obviously have gone back and created two lines, and then I would just loft that kind of area inside, and it would have created a hollow object. So you can certainly do two different splines, which will create kind of a channel, which would be the artery or the vein or artery or whatever, and then you would loft those together instead of just the outside profile. You would just loft the inside part of it. But then I can go and I can say modify and shell that if I wanted to, assuming that it's 1 millimeter thick, and then create it. Or actually, if I click on shell the whole thing, I could do that as well. Or actually, what I would probably want to do is click on this, click on the bottom, and then shell one, and it would create a something, So let me go back here. Okay, so awesome, Sarah, you're on. So yeah, the region with the X is what you're interested in. That's really great. So yeah, I just did it with one sketch profile around, but if you created two, you can use that channel in between those two to loft that to each other to create, the outside and inside part of that. So that's totally how I would do it. And the nice thing is that if you kind of make a mistake or whatever, you go in and you change that sketch. You can kind of move those control handles after the fact, and then your whole model dynamically updates. That's kind of the benefit of the parametric modeling. So that's pretty awesome there. Sarah, you also asked about comparing and models. So you can certainly do that, and I can give you some tips on that. So let me go and switch to that as well. And let me bring up Meshmixer again. There we go. Okay, so let's bring in a bunny. Like that. Transform, duplicate. So I just made two bunnies. They're exactly the same, but I'm going to work on one bunny and maybe just kind of do some sculpting on it. All right, so I'm going to go like that, and maybe in sculpting like that, and make this one bigger and out like that. Okay, so we have two bunnies right now. One I just manipulated, and the other I didn't. So inside of Meshmixer, if you have two objects, which I do, you see two bunnies right here. If you select both of those by holding down the Shift or Control key to select both of those, you get a couple different options for edit and analysis. So if you go into analysis and you say deviation, you can see how one model deviates from the other. So right now, this is a 1 millimeter deviation. And so anything that violates that 1 millimeter, or essentially satisfies that, becomes something that you can click on these little things and select. So these are 1 millimeter. If we go out, we start to see these turning yellow. Let me zoom in a little bit. We start to see these turning yellow, and then once we get to around 2.9, we see a yellow right here, which means that it's starting to get close, but it doesn't actually fulfill the criteria. But then when we start going here, we get a little bit of red, tiny bit, and then when it actually violates, when it's closer than 2.7, in this case millimeters, then you get a little thing right here that pops up. So if you were to click on this, it would actually select that object. Well, I kind of went through it, but you can it would actually make a selection around that object that you could then click and select and then do things to that. So you see if the deviation is very low, you see that there's a lot of kind of deviation around here. Clicking bidirectional, usually it just compares from one object to the other. But if you want, if you're using a complex object, sometimes it might be easier. It might be more. I'm sorry. Let me talk to you to explain this. Clicking bidirectional doesn't really change it. In Meshmixer, if you do the deviation, it measures from one object to the other, one directional. Sometimes it's more accurate to do both measurements, so it measures from one object to the other, and then from the other object back. It kind of gives you the same results, but sometimes it can be a little bit more accurate to click that. Sometimes, though, it can take a lot longer to do. But there are other tools out there as well. So let me show you another tool that you can use to do comparison as well. Let me go back here, and this is Autodesk Remake. Once it comes up here, go to these other tabs. There we go. So this is Remake. So I loaded a bunny into Remake. So you can kind of see here we have one bunny. Underneath this Analyze, detect issues, measure distance. A lot of this tool uses Meshmixer code. So you can get little reports on it and things like that, but Meshmixer has more features. But there's also an Analyze. So you say compare two models, and you say, this is bun 2, compare with bun 1, like this, and you say compare. And you can do some analysis inside of this as well. It doesn't allow you to select the areas. You can say, comparison range, maybe 1 millimeter compare, and you can do some things inside of here too. So Meshmixer does some things, let's go to 0.2, compare, like that. And when you say export, you can export a PNG of that. So if we do Ubuntu diff report, and let's kind of see what this looks like. There we go, Ubuntu diff report. So you get a lot more kind of things inside of here that if you are working in a medical field or whatever, you get a lot more things than the Meshmixer one tells you. So that's another way, and Remake allows you to do that. So let me go back there. So that's a couple of ways to do that. So Dan, awesome. And so Sarah, do you have to align the two images before you can analyze them? Let me answer your second question. So Autodesk Remake is free. You can do that. Let me before I know that there is. Yeah, let me just check here, because there is a free version and a non-free version of Remake. Let me actually just kind of show you what I'm doing here as I do it. Align this for the people in the replay so they can see the whole thing. I'm also recording this in HD for people that want to watch it later on the YouTube. So Remake right here. It's always super hard to find their price, but I would look at maybe Try. Yeah, there we go. So click on Try, and you get free, professional, and education. So Pro allows you to do local rendering. So Remake is for photogrammetry. You take a whole bunch of pictures and it comes back with a 3D model. But it looks like all of this other stuff, like the measurements, distance, compare two models, differential analysis, is not available in the free version. It's only in the Pro and educational version. The Pro is looks like $30 a month. So. Or if you're educational, you also get it for free. So hopefully that answers your questions. There. Yeah. So Sarah, do you have to align the two images? Yeah. Hopefully you can get it for free. Yeah. So do you have to align the two images? Yes, you do. When you do any of this differential analysis. So let me go back and share my screen again. if I go inside of here and I say analyze, compare two models, and compare these, okay, with number one, there isn't a line. Oops, let me zoom in here a little bit. There isn't a line button. I'm not entirely sure, you know, how it aligns it. I think maybe you could try to see if it aligns it properly. Otherwise, you would have to go into Meshmixer to do some aligning. I have some things in my class on that, but if like, let me move this. So if we had two bunnies that were, you know, radically different places like this, you can align them together. It is a little bit more manual to do so, but you can. I go over this in my class, but it's kind of a combination of things. You do some manual work and then you let Meshmixer do it for you. So the way that I would do this to align these, I would start on the one that I wanted. I would go to Edit to Create Pivot. I would make sure that Link to Target is on. And I would say Surface Point and I-ray frame. Surface Point, I-ray frame. So what I would do here is I would hold down the space bar and I would turn off free so that I'm snapping. So what I want to do is I'm going to snap. You can kind of see it snap to the top and snap there. So I am at a known kind of I-frame point. So what this does, as I click and drag, it's putting a pivot on the body wherever I drag facing directly towards me. So I'm going to put it maybe like right on the bunny's head like this. And say drop pivot. Boom. Now a pivot is there. So you can see there's a pivot on the head. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on this bunny and I'm going to pivot on this bunny. So edit, create pivot. And I'm going to put the pivot, I'm going to try to snap so that I'm right looking down on the top of the bunny's head. I'm going to put it right around the right place. Like I'm going to purposefully do it a little bit wrong, like maybe up here and say drop pivot and say done. Okay, so now we have two pivots. Really, you can just drag from one pivot to another and your object will move there. That's obviously not what I want, so I can say flip. I'd say, oh, okay, that's pretty close. And now I am essentially transforming around that pivot. So I can go and say, you know, I'm going to make this pretty much like that. That's not quite right. I'm going to go pretty much like that, and that's good enough for right now. So I have two bunnies that are in there, this bunny and this bunny. So here's kind of the critical part. I've got it most of the way there. So the one bunny I started with, I'm going to turn on the little magnet right here. You see magnet? That turns it all kind of ghosty. I'm going to click on my bunny that I'm moving, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say select. I'm going to select some areas on it, like maybe there and there and there, and then go to Edit, Align to Target. So it was kind of maybe subtle, but what it did is the places that I selected were sucked to the target to align. You can kind of see maybe right here the green was where it was, so it did move it. I'm going to turn up the solve iterations as many as I can and say no tolerance and say improve. Now the bunny moved a little bit and I'm going to say accept. So now I'm going to turn off the target of this. And whenever you get this kind of shimmering like this, it means that these meshes are pretty darn well aligned. I can go like these to these two and say analysis and deviation and see that I have the same deviation as I started with. So that's really good. It means that the rest of, I can even go down and see that the only place that these bunnies deviate, except at maybe at about right around here, 0.072 millimeters, that's when my alignment was a little bit off because I know this geometry is the same. But I could go back and do that align to target a little bit more, but my deviation for what should be aligned is 0.072 millimeters. So that's pretty good. So that align to target, let me go back. So that align to target command is what, if you have radically different things, you should move it yourself until it's almost there, and that align to target will get you the rest of the way there, if that kind of makes sense. There's no real like just align it type of tool out there. Yeah. So my last one in my last few minutes is from Ken that talks about resizing features. So let me bring this one up. Resizing features for better printing on a resin printer. So let me bring up Meshmixer and import his model. I believe this one was it. So Ken's question was, how do you enhance the features? Well, while this is loading in the background, let me give you some personal video here. Ken's question is, how does he enhance features on a model to properly, or actually in a kind of more enhanced way, print on a resin printer? So there's little tiny features on this that look great in a 3D model, but when they print out, even on a resin printer, the features are super duper duper small. How to make those features bigger, but not how to make the entire model bigger. So it's an interesting question, and it's kind of hard to do, but I figured out maybe one way that will help you, Ken, to do this. That is not the model. So let me import. Oh, here it was. Okay, this is the right one. It will come up in a moment here. So this is kind of a column. Once it comes up here, kind of a column with features on it. And there we go. So Ken's question is that these print out, let me turn that back on, that these print out okay, but he wants them bigger. So, I mean, the nice thing about this specific model is that this is a repeating pattern, so you might be able to do it once if you cut it properly. But let me kind of give you an example. So let me get rid of some of this geometry here and plane cut this and plane cut this just to deal with a little bit less of a model. And I'll just plane cut this too, make it easier. Okay, so the way to do this, let me kind of focus on this kind of floral design right here. So I'm going to hit select, and I'm going to make my brush small. I'm just going to do this for one feature, but hopefully you can understand how to do this for all of these that you would want. This is a time-consuming process, but I'm going to select this. It selects all of the triangles. But now I'm going to switch to crease angle, and my expand mode is going to be crease angle. So what I do is I'm going to hold down the control key, and it's going to deselect only things at that crease angle. So I'm kind of keeping the other parts of that flower as long as my mouse doesn't go over them. And I've selected only parts of that flower. Now, I'm not being entirely careful here, but you can kind of get it. Like this. And there's some other things in here that I've kind of forgot. And one tiny piece there. But generally, you want to select the things that you want to pop out. So I've selected that one flower, and now I'm going to hit, or actually I should do this properly, and edit to transform. So where is it? Sorry, deform to transform, like this. So I'm transforming this selection, and you see that my center of gravity is kind of over here. But I can transform this by clicking that white box in all directions. So it's making it large. It looks like I forgot some things over there. But it's transforming things to be a little bit larger. I can say I want it bigger in this direction. I want it bigger in maybe this direction. And you can kind of grow it that way. This is painful, but you would essentially, yeah, see I selected some in there. Actually, I could maybe create a face group for that. Turn face groups on. And maybe just select it. So I can select that and maybe hit the T key and try to expand this, maybe this way. Expand it in different ways, kind of expand it out. This is kind of a painful process, right? But I mean, see, I'm really expanding it like that. you can pop these out. The only thing I would do for this would be to play around with transforming it, one part of it, right? So one repeating pattern, and then transform that around. And the way that I talk about that is, if you create a pivot, you can create a pivot, wherever you want. Let me just kind of bounding box. Right, so I guess that's a bounding box. This will be a weird pivot, but drop a pivot there. When you hit the transform button, you can click actually a transform on the pivot, and I can say duplicate. It's going to be interesting. Duplicate, duplicate. I should have actually chosen a pivot more on the inside. But this is kind of a very interesting shape. So you could repeat that pattern around. I'm going to combine these and maybe run a make solid on them. But that's how I would do it. I would do a face transform for those and grow them, and then maybe just copy that all the way around. That's really the only way. I've combined all of these together, and this will probably crash Meshmixer, but we'll see. It'll actually be very interesting to see if it works. But see, I combined all of those. They were intersecting vertices all over the place, but this is what Made Solid is meant for. Instead of doing a Boolean union, it kind of does its best at trying to mesh everything together. I mean, this is going to look actually not that bad. It meshed them all together. Cool pattern on the bottom, and all of that. So that's not the easiest way of doing it, but the face transform would be the best way to doing it. So, it took me just an hour to get through all of that. So I really appreciate everybody who came on. Take my classes if you want shortcuts for things. Suggest new classes to me for ones. We're working on actually a couple of ones to come out with, so that'll be cool. And I just really appreciate everybody who stayed for the entire webinar. It's awesome, and watches this on our YouTube channel in a little bit. So thanks so much, and I'll see you next month, if not sooner. Bye.